Venezuela just accepted a massive oil deal with the United States, and this changes the entire global energy landscape overnight. After decades of hostility, sanctions, and mutual accusations, Caracas and Washington have reached an agreement that could flood world markets with Venezuelan oil. This isn't just about energy prices at your gas pump, though those will definitely be affected. This is about geopolitical power shifts, the future of socialism in Latin America, and a deal that has Russia, China, and Iran absolutely furious. What happens next could reshape alliances that have defined global politics for 20 years. Before we dive into this explosive development, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. The implications of this deal are unfolding rapidly, and you need to stay ahead of every twist in this story that affects everything from gas prices to superpower competition. Let me break down exactly what Venezuela and the United States have agreed to, because the details are stunning. The deal involves the United States lifting major sanctions on Venezuela as oil sector in exchange for significant political concessions from the Maduro government. Venezuela agrees to hold internationally monitored elections, release political prisoners, and allow opposition participation in the political process. In return, Venezuelan oil can flow freely to American refineries and global markets without the restrictions that have crippled Venezuela's economy for years. The agreement includes specific provisions about how much oil Venezuela can export, which companies can operate there, and what oversight mechanisms ensure compliance. The answer is brutally practical: energy prices and global competition. The United States and its allies face an energy crisis, and that anger affects elections. The Biden administration needs to increase global oil supply to bring down prices, and Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. Production could potentially double or triple within a couple of years. That's enough oil to significantly impact global markets and bring down prices. There's also a geopolitical calculation about China and Russia. Venezuela has become deeply dependent on both countries during the sanctions period. China has provided tens of billions in loans, taking future oil production as repayment. Russia has sold weapons, provided technical support, and helped Venezuela evade sanctions. The United States sees an opportunity to pull Venezuela away from this Russia-China axis by offering something neither Moscow nor Beijing can provide: access to American markets, technology, and the international financial system. From Venezuela's perspective, this deal is about survival. The Venezuelan economy has been in freefall for years. Hyperinflation destroyed savings and wages. Shortages of food and medicine became routine. Over 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country, one of the largest refugee crises in the world. The Maduro government faces internal pressure and knows the current situation is unsustainable. This deal offers economic lifeline that could stabilize the regime. But accepting American terms requires Maduro to make political concessions that risk his grip on power. Allowing genuinely free elections could mean losing power. Releasing political prisoners strengthens opposition. Opening up the political system creates uncertainty. Maduro is essentially gambling that economic recovery will make him popular enough to win legitimate elections. Russia issued a statement expressing disappointment and concern about the US-Venezuela deal. Russian officials invested heavily in Venezuela, providing loans, buying bonds, and supporting Maduro when he was isolated. Russia used Venezuela as a foothold in Latin America and a way to challenge American influence in the Western Hemisphere. China has provided over $60 billion in loans to Venezuela, mostly repaid through oil shipments. China owns stakes in Venezuelan oil fields and infrastructure. Chinese officials are carefully assessing how this American deal affects Chinese interests. Will Venezuela continue honoring commitments to China? If Venezuela pivots toward the United States and reduces support for Cuba, the Cuban government faces serious economic problems. Or will American pressure force Venezuela to prioritize U.S. interests? Chinese diplomats have been in contact with both Caracas and Washington, seeking assurances that Chinese investments are protected. China doesn't want confrontation with the United States over Venezuela, but China also won't simply abandon billions in investments. The most likely outcome is some arrangement where Chinese companies continue operating in Venezuela, but American firms get priority in new developments. China reluctantly accepts reduced influence in exchange for protecting existing assets. Iran views this development with alarm and anger. Iran and Venezuela developed close ties as fellow targets of American sanctions. They cooperated on oil shipments, technical support, and evading restrictions. Iranian tankers have delivered gasoline to Venezuela. Venezuelan gold has been shipped to Iran. This partnership was partly ideological, both countries claiming to resist American imperialism, and partly practical mutual assistance between sanctioned states. Venezuela reaching accommodation with the United States undermines the narrative of unified resistance to American pressure. It suggests that making deals with Washington is possible and perhaps preferable to defiant isolation. Iranian hardliners who oppose any engagement with America are weakened if Venezuela successfully negotiates sanctions relief. Iran worries other sanctioned countries might follow Venezuela's example. Cuba is perhaps the most concerned of all. Cuba and Venezuela have been ideological and economic partners for decades. Venezuelan oil subsidies have been crucial for the Cuban economy. Venezuelan support has helped Cuba weather its own sanctions and isolation. Cuban officials are publicly supporting Venezuela's right to make its own decisions while privately expressing deep concern. Cuba has no leverage to prevent this deal but will try to maintain influence in Caracas and ensure Venezuelan support continues in some form. This is a major setback for Cuba's regional strategy. Latin American reaction is mixed and reveals the region's political divisions. Left-wing governments in countries like Bolivia, Nicaragua, and to some extent Mexico express cautious support for any deal that helps Venezuela economically, while hoping it doesn't mean abandoning socialist principles. They want Venezuelan economic recovery but worry about American influence expanding in the region. Right-wing and centrist governments in countries like Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, and Chile are more openly welcoming. They see potential benefits from Venezuelan economic stabilization, including reduced refugee flows that have strained neighboring countries. They hope political opening in Venezuela could lead to genuine democratic transition. Many also welcome increased American engagement in the region as counterweight to Chinese influence. The Venezuelan opposition faces a dilemma. On one hand, they've demanded exactly what this deal includes: free elections, release of prisoners, political opening. On the other hand, they worry the deal strengthens Maduro by providing economic relief without guaranteeing he'll actually leave power. Opposition leaders are torn between supporting the agreement's democratic provisions and fearing Maduro will use economic recovery to consolidate authoritarian rule. Some opposition figures argue this is the best opportunity in years to achieve change through elections rather than continued confrontation. Others warn that Maduro will manipulate the process, use oil money to buy loyalty, and ultimately remain in power despite apparent concessions. The opposition is fractured, with different factions advocating different responses to the deal. Let's talk about the economic implications, because they're massive and global. If Venezuelan oil production increases significantly, global oil markets will see substantial new supply. Basic economics says increased supply with steady demand means lower prices. American consumers could see gas prices drop meaningfully over the next year or two. European countries could access Venezuelan oil to replace Russian supplies. OPEC and particularly Saudi Arabia are watching nervously. OPEC has been managing production to keep prices at levels that maximize revenue. Venezuelan oil flooding markets could undermine OPEC's pricing power. Saudi Arabia might have to cut its own production to compensate, losing market share. The delicate balance OPEC maintains could be disrupted, potentially triggering price wars or production disputes within the cartel. American oil companies are excited about returning to Venezuela. Venezuela's reserves are huge, and companies that operated there before sanctions know the potential. Major American firms are already negotiating with PDVSA about returning to fields they were forced to abandon. This could mean billions in investment flowing into Venezuela and eventually substantial profits returning to American companies and shareholders. But Venezuelan oil is heavy crude, difficult, and expensive to refine. American refineries on the Gulf Coast are specifically designed to process this type of oil and have been importing it from other sources at higher cost. Returning Venezuelan supply means these refineries can operate more efficiently and profitably. This benefits the American refining industry and ultimately consumers through lower refined product prices. Investment in infrastructure, healthcare, and education becomes possible. Shortages could ease as the government can afford imports. Salaries could be paid in real money rather than worthless currency. The refugee exodus could slow or even reverse if economic conditions improve enough. However, Venezuela faces enormous challenges even with sanctions lifted. The oil industry infrastructure is in terrible condition after years of underinvestment. Refineries, pipelines, and wells need massive repairs and upgrades. Skilled workers have left and need to be replaced or retrained. Corruption and mismanagement remain serious problems. Even in the best case, ramping up production will take years and require tens of billions in investment. There are also environmental concerns. Venezuelan oil production, especially from the Orinoco Belt where the heaviest oil is found, has significant environmental impacts. Expanding production raises questions about carbon emissions and climate commitments. Environmental groups are criticizing the deal as prioritizing short-term energy needs over climate goals. This creates political pressure on the Biden administration from its own supporters. The political implications within the United States are significant. Republicans are already attacking Biden for making deals with a dictator they've called a murderer and tyrant. Critics argue this rewards bad behavior and abandons Venezuelan Democrats. Conservative media is portraying this as weakness and betrayal of American values. This will be a campaign issue in upcoming elections. Democrats are divided. Some support the deal as pragmatic necessity that helps American consumers and potentially promotes democratic change in Venezuela. Others worry about the optics of negotiating with authoritarian governments and the signal it sends about American values. Progressive Democrats, particularly concerned about human rights, are torn between economic benefits and moral concerns. The deal includes monitoring mechanisms meant to ensure Venezuela complies with political commitments. International observers will oversee elections. Human rights organizations will track treatment of prisoners and opposition. There are also questions about what this means for American policy toward other countries. Does making a deal with Venezuela mean the United States should negotiate with other sanctioned authoritarian governments? Iran will certainly argue for similar treatment. North Korea might see an opportunity. Cuba could request parallel negotiations. Each case is different, but the precedent creates pressure for consistent approach. American officials emphasize that each situation is unique and Venezuela's specific circumstances, particularly its oil reserves and geographic proximity, make this case special. They argue this doesn't represent a general shift toward engagement with dictators. But actions speak louder than words, and other countries will test whether America is actually willing to make similar deals elsewhere. So what actually happens next? In the short term, technical teams from both countries will work on implementation details. American companies will send personnel to Venezuela to assess conditions and begin planning operations. Venezuelan officials will start releasing political prisoners and establishing frameworks for election monitoring. European countries are still struggling to replace Russian gas after relations collapsed. Global oil prices remain volatile and elevated. American consumers are angry about high gas prices. Oil shipments to the United States will gradually increase as legal and logistical barriers are removed. Within 6 months, we should see measurable increase in Venezuelan oil production and exports. Prices at American gas pumps could start declining noticeably. Venezuelan economy should show signs of stabilization. Political atmosphere in Venezuela will be tested as opposition organizes for promised elections, and the government as response reveals how genuine the opening really is. Within a year to 18 months, Venezuela is supposed to hold elections under international observation. This will be the critical test of whether the deal represents real change or just tactical maneuvering by Maduro. If elections appear genuinely free and fair, it validates the agreement. If they're obviously manipulated, it discredits the entire approach and puts enormous pressure on the United States to respond. The longer-term outcome depends on factors that are genuinely unpredictable. Does economic recovery make Maduro popular enough to win legitimate elections? Does the opposition unite effectively to offer a compelling alternative? Do old patterns of corruption and mismanagement reassert themselves despite new resources? Does American domestic politics shift in ways that change the U.S. commitment to the deal? What's absolutely clear is that this agreement represents a major shift in hemispheric politics and global energy markets. Venezuela is pivoting from isolation toward engagement with the United States. American strategy is choosing pragmatic accommodation over ideological confrontation. Oil markets are about to see significant new supply. Regional dynamics in Latin America are being reshaped. If you've made it this far, you understand this isn't just another news story. This is a fundamental change in relationships that have defined Latin American politics for decades. The ripple effects will touch everything from gas prices to refugee flows to great power competition. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand what this deal really means beyond the headlines. Most coverage misses the broader implications we've explored. Hit that like button to help this analysis reach more people who care about energy, geopolitics, and Latin America. Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Will Maduro actually hold free elections, or is this just a con to get sanctions relief? Will oil prices drop significantly? Should the United States be making deals with authoritarian governments? I want your perspective on this controversial agreement. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because this story will develop in major ways over the coming months. As implementation proceeds, as elections approach,